Coming up in this video, I'll show you how I speed paint a couple of Nolzur's Marvelous miniatures from WizKids, the Umber Hulk and the Rust Monster. Everybody, welcome back to Mini Junkie. My name's Jarrett. So this is a fairly quick video, I think, and it's continuing this sort of series of videos I'm doing where I'm painting up the Nolzur's Marvelous miniatures from WizKids for Dungeons & Dragons. But we're going to be applying this process I've been using, or this technique where it's a lot of inks and washes and glazes applied over the existing primer that the Nolzur's miniatures come with, and that's also the Pathfinder Deep Cuts miniatures that this can be applied to. And I'm combining two creatures, two classic D&D creatures, the Rust Monster and the Umber Hulk, because they're so fast and easy to do. It's kind of ridiculous, and yet I think they turn out looking pretty well. I'll put a picture up. What I also noticed, and I'll just add this before we move to painting because it doesn't need a big intro. There's actually a pretty big mold line that I didn't even see on the Umber Hulk until I took a photo of the finished miniature, which is really weird because I spent a long time trying to clean it up, and B, with all the painting and you know, close-up work on it, I'm shocked that I didn't spot it. The one, you know, caution I would make with these miniatures is something about their process does introduce a fair number of these seam lines and mold lines, and they can be in either spots that are easy to see after you've painted them, or are, you know, they're just kind of insidious, and you really got to sort of look all over the miniature very carefully, ideally with something that's gonna hopefully have good eyesight, because I don't, and try to catch them all, Pokemon, and then shave them off with your knife or file them off or whatever it is. And the reason, the other reason this is important, besides the fact that, you know, you want your miniature cleaned up when you paint it, this technique of using inks is really going to pull out the mold lines quite starkly when you're finished, because it's going to create a dark line along the mold line wherever that might be. And as always with these miniatures, let's say you wanted a darker Umber Hulk or something like that, always remember that you can choose to use different inks than I'm using. You could use a little more of the darker ink or a little more brown, whatever it is, to change the shades. It's really the technique itself that you're looking in, you know, that I'm showing you how to use, so that you can then start to think, okay, on this one, how am I going to use the inks? What kind of color? And, you know, mix and match and blend the inks together to create different tones. All right, enough talking. Let's go paint these. Here's a look at the two creatures we're going to be painting today. We'll start with the Rust Monster, and each time I do one of these D&D creatures, I try to find some reference imagery to look at colors and whatnot. So I've covered the base in Vallejo texture paste and painted it dark gray and then dry brushed light gray, and now what I'm doing is dry brushing some white onto all the raised edges and areas of the Rust Monster. The only bit of this creature that's not going to be orangey rust color is going to be these like frilly areas that are present on the tail and on the two sort of feeler thingies that are sticking out of his head. I don't actually know what to call those. So you just apply that sepia ink right out of the bottle. So I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to take Vallejo Model Wash. They've got a few different rust colors. In this case, I'm using light rust. And right out of the bottle, I'm applying it over most of like the body underneath that big shell he has on his back. So the face, the legs, the backs of the legs, and sort of the underbelly. Keep an eye out for pooling, obviously. Now I'm going to use Vallejo Model Wash Dark Rust, and right out of the bottle I'm going to apply it fairly heavily with a wash brush onto that carapace sort of armored shell on his back, and onto the tail and the end of the tail, and then, you know, just avoiding where we did the sepia ink previously. And also it's going to end up on the front. There's a little bit of armor paneling kind of on the front of each of his legs. And yeah, it's just a straight up wash, and when that's dry, I do 2 coats of this so that it's going to color it nice and orange. If you don't have these rust colors, you could go with a couple coats of sepia on the under part and Fugan orange on the upper part. Over the course of handling this miniature and applying these washes, you may find you're accidentally rubbing some off or creating white spots, etc. So I took the light rust wash once again and just went around, looked for spots where the coverage wasn't quite right, and just reapplied it. And it's also along sort of like the back edge of those feeler things on his head. And that's it. And then I just took some gray that I had used on the base and just cleaned up around the feet and anywhere else that I've got this rust wash on the base, which was quite a lot. And now we'll switch gears over to the Umber Hulk. You can see that he is an interesting color, kind of a yellowy brownish color. So I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to nail that. But for starts, I do the same thing as I did with the Rust Monster. I apply a dry brush of a fairly bright, crisp white. In my case, it's an old Skull White from Citadel Paints. You could use something like Ceramite White, for example. And yeah, just on the upper raised surfaces, the rough surfaces of the armor, places like that. Remember, we're doing this because whatever is underneath the inks and glazes that we apply is going to come through. So in this case, it's going to create some natural highlights for us. I know it's hard to see in the video because the primer is fairly white to begin with. Now, I wish this first step was more complicated, but I'm just taking Seraphim Sepia from GW and I am sloshing it all over the model, every square inch of this guy. Try not to get it on the base and try to be neat and watch out for heavy pooling and wick that up with your brush. The reason I'm doing this is you can see it tints at a nice sepia tone, which I think is what will be good to work with as we try to darken it and create different shades. Once that's dry, or mostly dry, I'm taking Reikland Flesh Shade and I'm going to apply that to all the fleshier areas between the armored shell kind of sections. So kind of like it where around his elbows, his neck, around the belly, those weird tubular looking areas on the sides, and anywhere else you want to apply it really is fine. You'll see it's tinting it that sort of orangey flesh color from the original picture. And then what I'm going to do is eventually come back and apply that a second time just to darken it a little bit more because it is a fairly subtle effect. Now what I'm going to do is take some of that Seraphim Sepia from the original coat. I'm going to put some in my tray, the palette well I've got here, and I'm going to use it as the basis for darkening, creating some darker shades and some modeling for the shell armor of the Umber Hulk. What I'm doing is applying just like a drop, maybe 2 drops of brown. Vallejo ink is more opaque, and so with the Seraphim Sepia being fairly transparent, the ink is going to help to create a little bit more opacity and help it show up a little better and darker. So you'll see I'm applying it mostly around where there's the edges of the plates or recessed areas like in the shoulders and things like that, just wherever it feels, because it's a very natural sort of surface, this the shell of the Umber Hulk, so you can kind of have fun blending where you want the darker patches to appear. It is going to blend fairly nicely in with the original sepia color that we created, especially once it's dry and has a matte coat on it. Then I'm going to start to bring the tones a little bit more towards a yellow. I'm going to put some yellow ink into the mix we've been using. So you see I'm just adding and changing the tones of the original pool of wash and ink. And I think that does help to have all the colors work well together and have them kind of blend together and look like they belong together organically. But I did want to make him a little more yellow just based on the original artwork. In my case, I apply that yellowness onto the plates of armor everywhere that there's like the pock marks. But you can kind of make out that there's rougher and pocked areas and then there's smooth areas. So I applied it mostly to the pocked areas. Arguably mine's too yellow. Maybe I could have gone a little lighter on that. I'm okay with it. I think he looks pretty cool in the final version. But if you don't want to go this route, or you just want to use darker tones like with the brown, or even add a touch of sepia ink to darken it, you can have fun with this guy. Any of those treatments would look great. Just make him look the way you want him to look. So yeah, once that's dry or drying, I just took the Reikland Flesh Shade and did a second coat over all the original places we put it, which is between the armored section and also the fingers and the weird kind of padded fleshy areas on the inside of his arms. And that's again to darken it and bring it more towards that Reikland Flesh Shade color and help it stand apart as different from the sepia colored shell armor sections. Now for the mandibles, like those, yeah, I guess they're just called mandibles, and the claws, I just added some sepia to the mix we've been working with to take it more in a dark direction, and just laid that right over the mandibles, just one coat straight out of the palette well. Same thing with the, I think I did 2 coats on the nails and just let them dry in between, because I did want to darken those up so that they stand apart from the fingers. When that was dry, I actually applied, from about halfway down the mandible, I applied another coat which creates some darkness towards the end of the mandibles, and then I applied a bit of black ink to that mix, just like 1 drop, which is, you know, the black ink goes a long way, so don't use too much. When I mix that up, and then I just blend that again even closer to the tips of the mandibles, just so that it goes towards dark ends on either side. I think it just looks pretty cool and gives some visual. When you're going to paint any of these D&D creatures, you want to maybe read about their powers or what should be different about them. And with the Umber Hulk, he has this thing where his eyes can, you know, effectively hypnotize a party member. And so I wanted them to stand out quite differently from the rest of him. And I wanted them to be bright and noticeable. So that's why first I start with just a base coat of white, so that whatever color I apply to them is going to stand out quite brightly. And in my case, I chose to go with green. So I take green ink, and I put too much on the smaller eyes, so I found myself trying to wick that off and not having huge success. And then just a nice smooth coat of green over the eyes, as you can see I'm applying here. And when that had dried, I then went and did a second layer of the ink just around the outer rims of the large eyes, so that it would look like they got brighter towards the center and towards the pupils. And here you can see how those eyes really pop out for the Umber Hulk from the rest of him. As we often do when we work with inks, we apply a matte varnish when it's finished. I like this matte varnish through my airbrush. You can see me applying it here, although by the time it'll look like it's going on wet, and then you gotta wait for it to dry, leading to this final result. Here's the Rust Monster and the Umber Hulk. Very happy with how these turned out, and as you can see from this video, super simple process. These completely organic creatures with no metal on them are kind of fun to play around with the tones and the different shading, etc. And that's it. I really enjoy painting these Nolzur's miniatures for Dungeons & Dragons from WizKids. I think the next one's going to be an owlbear, although I still struggle with the fact that owlbears are purple, and I got to figure out how to make that look good. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.